Hello, you're listening to An Israeli Monitor, and I'm Ben Caspit from Tel Aviv. What we call the Israeli peace camp once compromised the vast majority of the Israeli public. It had a governing party, Labor, and nearly 50 seats in the Knesset. Fast forward a decade or two, an intifada or two, and nowadays the Israeli left has 5 to 10 seats in the Knesset, and that's on a good day. Peace Now, the protest movement that could once mobilize tens of thousands, has shrunk. We don't have time to analyze the historical, political, and social reasons for the decline of the Israeli left, and to discuss how much of what happened was the fault of the camp itself or of its sometimes present, sometimes absent Palestinian partner, or of deep demographic shifts in Israel. Still, while the left is weaker, it hasn't disappeared. It's down, not out. The left-wing movement breaking the silence continues to spread the protest of Israeli soldiers and officers against what they term the indefensible actions of an occupying army. The area they call the West Bank is known to most Israelis by the biblical names Judea and Samaria, and what the movement sees as occupation, many Israelis regard as the realization of a historic right and or a strategic necessity. Peace Now is also still active. In recent weeks, it made headlines with its plans to rent a bulldozer and drive it up to an illegal outpost built by settlers on the grounds of Homesh, a settlement that was evacuated as part of Israel's disengagement from Gaza, where settlers have since operated a yeshiva. Despite court rulings, the settlers have refused to leave. Last December, a Homesh yeshiva student was murdered by Palestinian extremists, and the outpost is now a symbol of settler determination. Our guest today is Hagit Ofran, a veteran, determined Peace Now activist, responsible for the organization's settlement mapping project. She's also the granddaughter of one of the most influential and controversial Israelis ever to live here, Professor Isaiah Leibovich. Our conversation is taking place on the day of the Flag Parade, which is an annual event organized by religious Zionism to celebrate what they see as the liberation of Jerusalem from Arab control. Last year's celebrations set off a war with Hamas in Gaza and bloody riots in mixed Jewish Arab cities. Right now, this parade is over, peacefully, thank God. Hagit Ofran and I will be waiting for you after this short break.
Hi, I'm Elizabeth Hagit, and I'm the State Department correspondent at Al Monitor.
And I'm Joe Snell, I'm Al Monitor's video editor. Let's admit it, this past year has been difficult to stay on top of the news and sift through what's accurate and what's misleading. Let Al Monitor help you.
If you care about the Middle East and North Africa, you should consider listening to Al Monitor's audio series On the Middle East with Andrew Parasalidi and Amber and Zaman, and On Israel with Ben Caspit. You can now watch our newest video podcast, Reading the Middle East with Gilles Capel. You can subscribe to these series on your favorite podcast platforms.
And through a host of free daily and weekly newsletters, we offer a range of perspectives with the highest journalistic standards. You can subscribe to these newsletters at almonitor.com.
As an award-winning media service headquartered in Washington, D.C., Al Monitor has a network of over 160 contributors around the world.
So if you haven't done so already, be sure to visit almonitor.com, where you can find all of these newsletters and podcasts along with first-class reporting and analysis.
Now it's time to welcome and say shalom to Hagit Ofran. Hi, Hagit, and thank you for joining us here in On Israel and Al Monitor. Shalom, Hagit.
Shalom, hi, Ben.
Let's dive straight into the celebration. We're celebrating today in Israel, the Jerusalem Day. But I'll first talk with you about Homesh. There is no doubt that the outpost violates the disengagement law, and that your demand in Peace Now to evacuate it is legal. But since when has Peace Now used such aggressive tactics as moving in with a bulldozer? It looks like a provocation, just waiting for the police to intervene and block the protest, which it did finally. Is the using the D9, the bulldozer, was the right thing to your movement as Peace Now?
Look, I think if we didn't bring the bulldozer, maybe you wouldn't hear about it, and we would have protest. We would bring hundreds of people, and nobody would talk about it. So that's one thing. But I think more important is that we want to change a little bit the language, because what the settlers are doing is a total violation of the laws, and putting all the Israeli government as holding them as hostage. They decide where to go, what land to take, what will be the security considerations of Israel, and they're allowed to do whatever they want. So we wanted to say, this is insane. This is impossible. We cannot just say, oh, it's not nice. We want you to change things. We want to say, as if it's okay for them to establish it, so it's okay for us to take it down.
Understood. And do you believe that finally Minister of Defense Benny Gantz will evacuate Homesh? Because the political situation right now in Israel creates a bizarre situation that if the government will evacuate Homesh, by the way, I think that the Netanyahu governments did dozens of times, but the settlers, we have to say it, the settlers are coming back all the time. But if the Bennett-Lapid government will evacuate Homesh, it will maybe fall down, and then you will get the extreme right again. So maybe it's a lose-lose situation from your side.
I think all the time people say, oh, but the government will fall, but the government will fall. Well, the government is in a shaky situation from the beginning, but it didn't fall until now, and there are enough interests to keep it on, and therefore it continues. And we cannot paralyze everything by saying, oh, it would fall, it would fall. It's about time that the owners of the land will be allowed to return to their land without being hit and attacked by settlers. And it's about time that the Israeli IDF, the Israeli army, will not need to protect the group of settlers who are violating the law and settling in a dangerous place.
Okay, I want to ask you a more general question before we will go on with the Jerusalem Day and Temple Mount and the Parade of Flags, etc. You are considered a leading expert on the settlement enterprise, at least on your side of the political map. Can you say how many Israelis live in those settlements nowadays? Are the numbers growing or shrinking? I've been seeing different figures. Everyone says different things. It's a fact that there are a lot more settlers today than there's been 10 or 20 years ago. But in the last few years, what's the situation from your eyes?
I look at the data, or the official data of the government of Israel, which is the Israeli Central Bureau of Statistics. And the numbers are clear that there is constant growth in the settlements. We are talking about almost 500,000 living in West Bank settlements and another 220, or actually 30,000 in East Jerusalem. These are the numbers. What we did see is a little slowdown in the growth, meaning that if it was 10 years ago, 4 or 3.5% growth a year, which is huge, comparing to Israel, which is less than 2%. Now the growth in settlements is 2.5 or a little more. So there is a slowdown in the growth rate, but there is growth all the time.
No shrinkage.
No, there are some settlements that you have more people that left them than people moved in, but in general, it's growing.
The total numbers are growing. You know, when the Oslo agreements were signed in 1993, some 40,000 settlers were living in Judea and Samaria. Almost 30 years on, that number is said to be between 500,000 and 600,000, as just you stated right now. Israel's recognition at the time of a two-state solution was supposed to mark the end of the settlement enterprise, or at least to seriously shrink it. But in fact, the opposite is true. Would it be correct to say the settlers have won, or does it look differently from your perspective?
Of course, they won in the short term, meaning that they are there, they're growing, and in the general public opinion, most of the Israelis and the Palestinians and the international community don't see any way out or any way for Israel to withdraw from the West Bank because we have so many settlers there. However, they did not succeed in persuading the Israeli public that settlements are so important that we cannot give it up forever. What they managed to do is to use the sentiment of the fear and the security, saying we cannot withdraw, we cannot trust the Palestinians, what will happen if we leave. But as soon as there is leadership in Israel that says, that's it, we are going out of the West Bank, the majority of Israelis, I'm sure, will support it. And, you know, I like to say that the bad news is that in Israel, nobody cares about what's going on in the West Bank. But at the same time, the good news is that nobody cares about the settlements or what's going on in the West Bank. And most Israelis never visited the settlement, and they couldn't care less if some settlers would have to move to another place. So I cannot say I'm optimistic right now, but I'm hopeful, and I'm sure that it is possible to bring Israel to withdraw. We just don't see the political way to get there right now.
It's interesting to hear it from you, because as my impression is that the Israeli public moved a long way to the right, and that the two-state solution is losing ground rapidly. By the way, on the other side as well. And there is no leadership to talk about it. Do you see an Israeli leader that will be popular enough? He has to come from the center or the center right, because no lefty Israeli leader after Rabin's assassination will get enough support to do it. Do you really see the possibility of what you just said, of a bold leadership that will tell Israelis it's about time to establish the Palestinian state that will live side by side, and etc.?
Do I see the leader? No, I don't see her yet. But it doesn't mean that it's impossible, okay? Truly, politically, right now, it's not feasible to have a two-state solution. But sometime, and we never know what will happen. You know, we didn't know if you came to Russia in 1988, you wouldn't know that it will collapse a few months later. And maybe this can happen to the Israeli control over the West Bank.
Okay, now you're of course from Peace Now, and this movement has been harshly critical of the annual flag parade, which goes through the Muslim quarter of Jerusalem's old city, something you regard as a deliberate provocation and a slap in the face of the Muslim residents. We are now in the middle of this parade, and we all hope it will end peacefully. Last year, by the way, this parade exactly was shut down by Prime Minister Netanyahu, and then we had this clash with Gaza and the clash in the cities here in Israel, and many people lost their lives, etc. On the other hand, the right wing claims your objections demonstrate disloyalty to the concept of a unified Jerusalem. They basically argue that Israelis have the right to display their flag anywhere. What's your argument?
It's not a flag parade, it's a hate parade. And what we see year and year again is horrible pictures of Israeli youngsters screaming and yelling hate songs and racist chanting. And even already today we saw some hitting and some cursing and harassment against the Palestinians. It is nothing to be proud of. And by the way, this Jerusalem Day is not really celebrated by the Israeli public. It is very narrow group or distinct group of people, the national religious movement that made it into a big holiday, but the majority of Israelis don't even remember that this day exists unless there is a mega provocation like right now in the parade in the old city. I think that it is really a shame that the government of Israel is allowing this to take place. And they can celebrate Jerusalem not by going through the old city, the Muslim quarter. Jerusalem is not only the old city, Jerusalem is not only the Muslim quarter, it's also the Jewish quarter, it's also West Jerusalem. There are many places to celebrate Jerusalem.
The Jerusalem Day is not only the parade of flags. We also have the so sensitive and explosive issue of the Temple Mount. After when Israel conquered East Jerusalem in a 6-day war, and they unified the city and declared it as the eternal capital, there was a status quo. The Muslims kept on praying in their mosque on Temple Mount, and we came back to the Western Wall. It is downstairs from there, and we let a few Israelis, pilgrims, to go to the Temple Mount, but not pray and not provocate or sing the anthem or wave an Israeli flag. Today, we had a record number of Israelis going up to the Temple Mount. Some had blue and white flags. Some tried to pray. How do you see this move in the status quo? Do you fear it will bring us to a bad place?
I think already it brought us to very bad places. The instability, the violence of recent years is not coming from nowhere. And the Temple Mount, the Haram Sharif, is the volcanic core of our conflict. And we're letting the pyromaniacs to play with the matches. And we're allowing them to, by claiming that it's an issue of freedom of worship, which is a total bluff, to say, well, it's legitimate that the Jews will be allowed to pray on the Temple Mount, while what they are really doing is provocation and demonstrations of sovereignty over the Temple Mount. And today, I think we saw the most extreme pictures that I haven't seen in the past. Hundreds of Israelis chanting out loud on the Temple Mount in a demonstration, which I believe to be opposite to holiness. And if it is so holy for us, we cannot make it like a soccer field chanting place. And it's proving to be not about the freedom of worship, but about the freedom to show sovereignty and to provoke the Muslim presence and the Muslim holiness. And I want also to add that as a Jew that do care about the Temple Mount, our heritage was never about taking someone else's holy sites. And even, the Temple Mount itself, when King David came to Jerusalem, he did not take it by force. He bought it from the owner. And but he could take it because he conquered all Jerusalem. But the holy place you don't take by force. That's what our fathers teach us, and that's the heritage of the Jews. And it was never an ask or any demand by the Jews to pray over the Temple Mount. It is an important site for us, but we never demanded to pray on it. And right now, in the name of this demand, we are ready to destroy all what we built here.
You're touching a very interesting point, because the vast majority, maybe all, the Haredi Orthodox Jews and leaders of this Jewry are stating loud and clear that it is forbidden for a Jew to pray right now on Temple Mount before Messiah is coming. But in the last maybe 10 or 15 years, other rabbis from the National Zionist movement, more and more rabbis are saying that it is a mitzvah, it is something every Jew has to say. It is familiar, especially within the right wing and the extreme right. And what we see maybe, and I want to hear you about it, that these extremists are taking us this conflict from a national conflict to a religious conflict. And this is very, very dangerous.
Absolutely. And this is why I said that we're allowing the pyromaniacs to play with matches at the volcanic core of our conflict, which is the Temple Mount, Haram al-Sharif. And what they're interested in is to change the place and to undermine the Muslim presence and to make it a Jewish place. And for them, the Jewish prayer is just one step in the way to eventually abolish the mosques, God forbid.
But to seal this issue, you have extremists on the other side as well, and you find over and over again hundreds of youngsters, of Muslim youngsters gathering in the mosque with stones and then Molotov bottles, etc., and throwing it on Jews that are praying downstairs in the Western Wall. It's not a one-sided battle here. The other side, which is being fueled by Hamas, is trying to provoke and to enlighten the whole arena as well.
So this is why we need to restrain our extremists, so not to let Hamas and others to inflate the Temple Mount. And by the way, last month during Ramadan, there was a statement as if there were stones thrown from the Temple Mount on the Wailing Wall, and it was just not true. There was not a single stone thrown at the Temple Mount. There were stones thrown at the police on the Temple Mount, but in the issue of the Temple Mount, you don't need even something to be true to inflate the area. It could be a rumor, baseless rumor, to make a war here. So it's so sensitive, and we are being so unwise because of right-wing extremists that manage to, take over Likud party and to make members of Knesset totally secular, who don't care about religion in general, to to say that it's so important that Jews will pray on the Temple Mount. It's a national issue. It's not a religious issue, but they're using the religious sentiments in order to really make our conflict much, much harder to solve and much, much harder to live.
Okay, my last question is again more general. How does Peace Now regard the current government, which includes both the left wing and the settlers? Overall, it is a positive development, or a government that simply perpetuates the occupation? How significant is the participation of an Arab party in this government for the first time in the Israeli history?
In terms of the policies in the West Bank, in settlements, there is no real difference between this government and previous governments. You can see it not only in the numbers that are more or less similar in terms of approval of plans and promotion of settlements, but also in major plans, in projects that are very serious, that might undermine the possibility of a Palestinian state, etc. Developments in Hebron, developments in outposts, settler violence, all this is almost similar to previous governments. So in our field of the occupied territories, of the settlement policies, there is no difference. Maybe the only difference is that there is a new administration in the White House that to some extent is managing to restrain some very, very crazy plans, but in general, this government is not
and you don't have this political issue of saying to yourselves, listen, hey, this is not ideal, but the alternative is worse. Netanyahu can come back, and now it's a different Netanyahu. He's without any restraints, and he can be a lot worse to our ideas. You don't think like this way?
So I was talking about our issue. Of course, Netanyahu was, doing many horrible things to the state of Israel, including destroying the democratic system, and that is not the case in this government. But in terms of occupation, this government is very, very bad. And I think that when we are opposing this policy, it doesn't mean necessarily to call for, to call the government to fall. If those who are in favor of two states that don't like Israeli occupation in the government should have raised their voices and say something about this policy. And this doesn't mean that it will immediately make the government fall, but start to argue, start to say something. You cannot just sit there and do nothing and say, oh, it will make the government fall. It doesn't make the government fall. You just need to start to demand things, and then we'll see what happens.
Hagit Ofran, the co-director of the Settlement Watch project of the Israeli Peace Now movement, Shalom Achshav. Thank you very much for this fascinating talk. Toda rabba, Hagit. And we will
Thank you very much, Ben.
Go now for a short break and come back just after it. Thank you. Toda, Hagit.
Bye-bye.
Hello, I'm Gilles Kepel, professor at Sciences Po and Normal Sup in Paris, and author of a number of books and articles on the Middle East. Through my new podcast, Reading the Middle East, on the award-winning media service and Monitor, we will take a deep dive into the trends in the region with the authors and thought leaders who are shaping how we think about the Middle East. Reading the Middle East will be a fantastic addition to Al Monitor's outstanding podcast lineup, including On the Middle East with Andrew Paraziliti and Amber Zaman, and On Israel with Ben Caspit. You can subscribe on your favorite listening platforms. We look forward to your joining our conversation.
for staying with us. In this interesting conversation, Hagit Ofran from Peace Now, I asked her how come this peaceful movement that symbolizes peace and pragmatism is acting as it was a part of the other side and renting a bulldozer, a D9, in order to actually ruin or vandalize this illegal outpost named Homesh. And she said that they thought it's wise and maybe necessary to change the language. If the settlers are holding the whole state as a hostage, we wanted, she said, to say it is insane. And if it's possible to rebuild Homesh against the law, so it should be possible to ruin it. Simple logic, I think. In her view, it's impossible that Israel will go on be held hostage by the weakness of the government and the law and the army and the police, and it's about time that the government and the army will stop protecting these outlaws, the settlers, that are rebuilding this illegal outpost over and over again during the years. By the way, even the Netanyahu governments, since the disengagement, evacuated Homesh again and again, and each time the settlers came back and built the yeshiva until this terrorist attack a year ago that made Homesh a symbol. Then we discussed the core issue, and I think I asked Hagit Ofran if the settlers won eventually when Israel and the Palestinians signed the Oslo Accords. It was 1993, and there were 40,000 settlers in Judea and Samaria or the West Bank. Now there is between 500,000 and 600,000, and it looks like a clear win for the settlers movement. And she said that of course they won in the short term. They are there, they are growing stronger, and I think it's almost a consensus that no one sees a way that will enable Israel to just get out of the territories and evacuate so many settlements and settlers. We're talking about a 9 million people state, and but she said that the settlers did not succeed convincing the Israeli people that they are really necessary. The public is not really interested in the settlements, and when a leadership, the right leadership from her point of view, will rise and decide that it's about time to go back to this two-state solution, the public, the Israeli public, will still support it in a vast majority. We mentioned also the so sensitive holy place of the Temple Mount, and she said that this is the volcanic core of the conflict, and the Israeli government and the police are letting and allowing the pyromaniacs, as she called them, to play with matches right beside this fuel reservoir that can lit the whole Middle East in flames. But finally, I have to state that after this conversation, this podcast was recorded, I think the bottom line was that this year, the Jerusalem Day celebrations, the parade of flags were held without eruption, without rockets from Gaza, without a third intifada, thank God. And I hope to see you here next week, next time, same time, same place next week in Al Monitor in On Israel. I'm Ben Caspit from Tel Aviv. Thank you, take care, and bye-bye.